The restaurant my mother chose was the kind that felt designed to prevent honesty. Private dining room. Heavy linen tablecloths. Low amber lighting that softened every face into something warmer than it actually was. The kind of place where voices instinctively lowered themselves and disagreements were tucked away behind polite smiles and refilled water glasses. I remember noticing the smell first, braised meat, warm bread, something floral near the entrance that was almost too sweet. The kind of environment that communicates before a single word is spoken. Nothing serious happens here. I should have paid attention to that feeling. I arrived 7 minutes early, which is what I always do. My mother arrived 3 minutes after, which is what she always does. She walked in wearing the particular expression she reserves for occasions she controls, satisfied before anything has even begun. "You look tired," she said, kissing my cheek. That was her version of a greeting. The table had been set for 8. I counted the chairs before I sat down. "Mom, who else is coming?" She waved her hand. "Some of your aunts. Cousins. Just family." I didn't recognize 2 of the people already seated. I noted that. My mother is precise about guest lists the same way she is precise about everything else that serves her. She doesn't include people by accident. I asked her again once we were seated while the bread was being passed. "Why didn't you mention you'd invited this many people?" She tilted her head. "Does everything need to be announced in advance?" Not a deflection. A redirect. There's a difference, and I had spent 36 years learning to spot it. The meal moved forward. Wine was poured. Conversations overlapped. My mother laughed more easily than usual, that particular laugh she performs when she wants a room to believe she has nothing to hide. I was reaching for my water glass when I noticed him. An elderly man standing at the edge of the room. 60-something, gray at the temples, wearing a simple dark jacket. He wasn't looking around the way visitors do when they're uncertain where to go. He was looking directly at me. He walked to the table without hesitation. He sat down across from me, and in a voice quieter than I expected, he said, "I've waited 36 years to meet my daughter." The room didn't stop. The conversations continued somewhere behind me. Water was still being poured. Someone near the window was laughing. But at our end of the table, everything went very still. My mother's expression shifted so quickly I nearly missed it. The satisfaction drained and something harder replaced it, something practiced, something she had rehearsed for exactly this moment. She laughed, short, controlled, calibrated. "See," she said, glancing around the table. "This is exactly why I never wanted this." He always loved attention. Then she turned to me. "Don't let him manipulate you the way he manipulated me." I looked at her, then back at him. My father was dead. I had been told this so many times that the fact had calcified. It wasn't a story anymore. It was structural. It was part of the architecture of who I was, a woman who had grown up without a father because her father had not survived long enough to know her. The man sitting across from me did not look dead. He looked exhausted. He looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally, after great effort, set it down. He reached into his jacket pocket slowly, the way people move when they want to signal they are not a threat, and placed something on the table between us. A card. The envelope was worn at the corners. The kind of worn that comes from years of being moved, held, stored, and kept. My name was written on the front in handwriting I had never seen before. I reached for it. My mother's hand was faster. She picked it up and pressed it into her purse in a single fluid motion, the way you remove something from a child's reach. Practiced. Automatic. "This is not the time," she said. "Mom." "Hannah." Her voice dropped. The smile remained. Some people spend their lives chasing people who never wanted them. I raised you. That should have been enough. The familiar wound opened before I could stop it. But this time, something was different. Because the man across from me was watching my face with an expression I didn't have language for yet. Not pity. Not guilt. Something closer to recognition. Like he had seen this exact moment coming for years and had grieved it in advance. I never died, he said quietly. And I never stopped. I wanted to ask him what that meant. I wanted to ask my mother what was inside that envelope. Before I could form either question, Daniel looked directly at me and said, "That isn't the only letter your mother kept from you." I drove to my mother's house because I didn't know where else to go. That, in itself, told me something I wasn't ready to examine. The house on Garfield Street looks exactly the same as it did when I was 12. Cream-colored siding. A front porch with 2 chairs that have never been sat in for any length of time because my mother believes front porches are for appearances rather than use. The oak tree in the side yard that I used to climb has grown so wide its roots are beginning to lift the concrete path near the gate. Inside, it smells like the same fabric softener she has used for 30 years. The hallway is narrow and dark during the day because she keeps the curtains drawn, always has. The living room walls are covered in framed photographs, and I had walked past them hundreds of times without really looking. I looked now. She was in the kitchen when I arrived. She'd beaten me home from the restaurant. "Close the door behind you," she said, not turning around. I stood in the doorway. "Mom, I need you to tell me who that man was." "You know who he said he was." "I'm asking who he actually is." She set down the dish she was drying, turned, studied me with the particular expression she reserves for conversations she has already decided to control. "He's someone who walked away when things became difficult," she said. "And now that he's old and probably lonely, he's decided to show up and cause problems." That's the whole story. He said he tried to contact me. He said he spent. Hannah. Her voice carried that low, final note. The one that used to end every argument before I was old enough to sustain one. "You are 36 years old. Do you really need a stranger to walk into a restaurant and hand you a story before you'll accept what I've told you your entire life?" I asked her about the card. The worn envelope. My name on the front. "There is no card," she said. "I watched you put it in your purse. You watched me remove a distraction from a man who was performing for an audience." She picked the dish back up. "He always loved an audience. That never changed. That was the first dismissal. It wouldn't be the last." I moved past her into the hallway, which she allowed, a calculated allowance, I understand now. She didn't follow immediately. She let me stand in front of those framed photographs long enough to start questioning my own memory. There were pictures of Melissa at every age. Melissa at 7, 12, 16. Melissa's college graduation. Melissa's wedding. There were pictures of me too. But the early ones, the infant ones, were sparse. 3, maybe 4 photographs from the first 2 years of my life, compared to a full wall's worth of my sister. I asked about it once, when I was maybe 14. My mother told me the early photos were lost in a move. At the time, that explanation seemed reasonable. I pulled open the drawer of the narrow console table beneath the photographs. My mother stored things there, batteries, take-out menus, the kind of accumulation that happens when a drawer has never been fully cleaned out. Underneath a folded insurance document, I found a photograph. Not framed, not displayed. Face down, as though it had been placed there without consideration, or with very careful consideration. I turned it over. A man I now recognized was holding an infant. The infant was dressed in pale yellow. The man, Daniel, was looking at the camera with an expression so unguarded it almost felt wrong to see, like walking into a room before someone knows you're there. I turned the photograph over. Written in pencil, faded but legible. First visit after custody hearing. I read it twice. Then I heard my mother's footsteps in the hallway. She saw the photograph in my hand and something shifted in her face, quick, controlled, gone before most people would have caught it. I caught it. Where did you find that? In the drawer. That shouldn't be in there. Why not? She crossed her arms. Because it's old and it means nothing. It says custody hearing on the back. It says a lot of things. Old photographs say a lot of things. Mom, your father didn't want you, Hannah. She said it the way someone says something they have said so many times it has stopped carrying weight for them, even if it never stopped carrying weight for the person hearing it. If he cared so much, where was he when you graduated? Where was he at 18? At 25? I was there. Every time. Me. The graduation. She always returned to the graduation. I have a memory of sitting in the auditorium, cap on, watching other students receive flowers from fathers in the audience. I have a memory of scanning the rows and finding only my mother's face, pleased and composed and watching. For years, that memory was proof. He wasn't there. Therefore, he hadn't cared. Standing in the hallway with the photograph in my hand, I turned that logic over slowly. He hadn't been there. But the back of this photograph described a court proceeding. Courts don't convene over men who walk away without looking back. Courts convene when someone refuses to let them leave. I hadn't drawn that conclusion yet, not fully, not clearly. I thought the photograph was a discrepancy. A single inconsistency in a story that was otherwise intact. That was the wrong conclusion. But I wouldn't understand how wrong until later. I slipped the photograph into my jacket pocket. My mother watched me do it and said nothing, which I would come to understand was its own form of admission. If there had been custody hearings, then why had Hannah spent 36 years believing there had never been a father at all? The text came from a number I didn't recognize. Patricia has a storage unit on Route 9. Unit 114. I have the access code. You should go before she moves things again. No name. No explanation. I sat with my phone for a long time before I responded. A compliance analyst by profession and by instinct, I am trained to treat unsolicited information with caution. Anonymous tips exist on a spectrum. They are sometimes genuine, and sometimes they are tests. But the photograph in my jacket pocket was still warm from my body heat, and the words custody hearing hadn't left my mind since the previous afternoon. I texted back, "Who is this?" The reply came 4 minutes later. "Someone who watched your mother lie for a long time and got tired of it." Route 9 storage sits at the edge of town where the commercial buildings thin out and give way to flat lots and chain-link fences. The kind of place nobody visits unless they have a reason to. The facility smells like concrete dust and rust, the particular combination of things sealed away from weather but not from time. Unit 114 was at the far end of the second corridor. The access code worked. The door rolled up with a sound like something being exhaled. Inside, 12 cardboard boxes stacked in 2 rows. A folding table. A plastic storage bin with a cracked lid. The boxes were labeled in my mother's handwriting, neat, slanted, precise. Tax records. Winter items. Kitchen donation. Miscellaneous. I started with miscellaneous. It contained 3 decorative items I remembered from the Garfield Street living room, a broken clock, and a manila envelope of old utility bills from an address I didn't recognize. I noted the address. Moved to the next box. My phone rang at 10:47 a.m. My mother. I let it go to voicemail and kept working. The second box held old school records, Melissa's. Report cards, certificates, a fifth-grade science project still in its presentation folder. I set it aside. The third box held the same, more of Melissa's history, carefully preserved. Then my phone rang again. This time I listened to the voicemail immediately after she left it. Her voice was level, almost gentle. Hannah, I don't know who contacted you or what they told you, but I'm asking you, as your mother, to come home and talk to me before you do anything that cannot be undone. Please. Reasonable. Measured. The voice of a woman who had done nothing wrong and was simply concerned. I put my phone back in my pocket and opened the fourth box. The box was heavier than the others. Inside, sealed in a large Ziploc bag, were envelopes. Dozens of them. Each one addressed to me. Hannah Mercer. The Garfield Street address. Each one in the same handwriting, careful, slightly formal, the handwriting of someone who understood this correspondence mattered. I counted them. 28 envelopes. Every one unopened. Every one still sealed. The postmarks spanned years, the earliest dated from when I was 7, the most recent from 11 years ago. Cards for birthdays, the return address consistent across nearly all of them, a name I now recognized. Daniel Brooks. He had written to me 28 times. And 28 times, the letters had traveled from wherever he was directly into a box in a storage unit on Route 9, sealed in a Ziploc bag, never opened, never delivered, never mentioned. My phone rang again. This time the voicemail was different. I know where you are. Someone told you things that are not their business to share, and I need you to understand you are tearing this family apart. After everything I sacrificed for you, every year I spent alone raising you, protecting you from someone who couldn't be bothered, this is what you do with that? Go through my private property based on a rumor from someone who doesn't know the first thing about what I went through. The gilt architecture was flawless. It always had been. I set the phone face down on the folding table. I reached into the bag and carefully removed the earliest envelope. The postmark read, Hannah's 7th birthday. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges, soft from years of storage. My name was written on the front with a care that felt deliberate, each letter formed like it mattered that I would one day read it. I held it. I did not open it. Not yet. Not in a storage unit with concrete dust in the air and my mother's voice still running through my head. Whatever was inside that envelope deserved more than this. I placed it gently on top of the stack. Then my phone rang a third time. I let it ring. When I turned back to the box to replace the envelopes, I noticed something I had missed underneath the final stack. A single sheet of paper, folded once. On it, a string of numbers and letters formatted in a way I recognized immediately from my professional life, a case filing number. A court case number. Handwritten with a county name printed carefully beneath it. As Hannah lifted the final stack of cards, she found something underneath them that changed everything, a court case number. I am good at my job because I do not react. Financial compliance is not a field that rewards emotion. It rewards documentation, pattern recognition, and the discipline to build a case before you open your mouth. You do not accuse. You gather. You organize. You wait until the evidence is heavier than the denial. I applied the same discipline to my mother. I did not call her back. I did not return to Garfield Street. I photographed every envelope from the storage unit, logged each postmark in a spreadsheet on my phone, and drove directly to the county courthouse the following morning. The archives room sits on the building's lower level, accessible through a side corridor that smells like old paper and central heating working harder than it needs to. The lighting is fluorescent and flat, the kind of light that removes all ambiguity. Everything it touches looks exactly like what it is. The clerk at the records window was methodical and unhurried, which I appreciated. I gave her the case number from the folded sheet. She typed it in, waited, typed something else. "That's a family court filing," she said. "Civil division. You want the full jacket?" "Please." She returned 12 minutes later with a manila folder, thicker than I expected. I carried it to one of the long wooden tables and sat down. I opened it. The first document was a petition for visitation rights, filed by Daniel Allen Brooks, dated 14 months after I was born. I turned to the next page. A response, filed by Patricia and Mercer's attorney, contesting the petition on the grounds of, I read the language carefully, the petitioner's history of emotional instability and failure to maintain consistent contact. I set that page down slowly. He had filed first. She had responded by characterizing him as unstable. The next petition was filed 2 years later. Contested again. The third for years after that. The fourth, 3 years after the third. I laid the documents side by side on the table, in chronological order, the way I would arrange financial records when building an audit trail. For petitions. For contests. One consistent pattern. He had spent the first decade of my life trying to get into a courtroom to argue for the right to see me. My mother had spent the same decade making sure he lost. The wound I had carried since childhood, the one that said your father didn't want you, had never been a wound caused by his absence. It had been installed. I sat with that for a moment. Then I kept reading. My phone buzzed at 11:22 a.m. A text from Melissa. "Mom says you're at the courthouse. What are you doing?" "You're upsetting her." I turned my phone face down. The fourth petition included a section I had to read 3 times before I trusted my own comprehension. Patricia's legal response cited, as grounds for denial, that Daniel had failed to maintain a presence in the child's life, the child being me, and that contact would cause undue emotional disruption. He had failed to maintain a presence. After she had moved without notice. After she had intercepted his letters. After she had fought 4 consecutive petitions in family court. I photographed every page. I was on my way out when I heard my name. She was standing near the main entrance. My mother. Dressed neatly, handbag over one arm, posture composed. She had not come in. She was waiting just outside the glass doors, positioned where I would have to walk past her to reach my car. I pushed through the door. "Hannah." She fell into step beside me, her voice pleasant, conversational, as though we were leaving a restaurant together rather than a courthouse where I had just spent 2 hours reading the documented record of her deception. "I think we should talk. Really talk. Without old photographs and phone tips from people who have no idea what our family went through." I kept walking. "You know what I find sad," she continued. Her tone shifted, still smooth, but with something harder underneath it now, something she was no longer quite containing. "Some people spend their lives chasing people who never wanted them. I raised you, Hannah, alone, for 36 years. That should have been enough." I stopped at my car, turned to face her. She was smiling. The particular smile she produces when she believes she has landed something. "He filed 4 petitions," I said. The smile didn't move, but something behind it did. You should talk to an attorney before you start making accusations based on old paperwork, she said. Documents from 30 years ago don't tell the whole story. No, I said. They don't. I unlocked my car and got in. I believed, at that moment, that I understood the shape of it. A custody dispute. Contested petitions. A mother who had fought to keep a father away and then rewritten the reasons so completely that her own daughter had spent a lifetime grieving an abandonment that had never actually occurred. That felt like the full picture. It wasn't. Hannah left the courthouse believing she'd uncovered the biggest lie of her life until one address on the final filing caught her eye. The address on the final court filing was 47 miles from the house where I grew up. Not across a state line. Not in another country. Not somewhere that would have made distance a reasonable explanation for 36 years of silence. 47 miles. An hour's drive on a clear day. Less on a Sunday. I sat in my car outside the courthouse for several minutes after I noticed it. The filing was from 19 years ago, which meant that at some point during my 17th year, while I was in high school believing my father was dead, he had a legal address less than an hour away. I drove there the following morning without calling ahead. The house sits at the end of a gravel road that opens suddenly onto a wide lot bordering a lake. The kind of property that takes decades to settle into old trees, a wooden dock that has been repaired in sections over many years, a garden along the south wall that someone tends carefully. The house itself is modest, white with dark shutters. A covered porch facing the water. The air smelled like pine and cold lake water. I was still on the front path when the door opened. Daniel stood in the frame. He had clearly seen my car from inside. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had rehearsed this moment for so long that the actual arrival of it had gone quiet in him. "You found the address," he said. "It was on the last filing." He stepped back from the door. "Come in." The interior was lived in and still. Books on most surfaces. A kitchen visible from the entry hall. A kettle already on. Photographs on a shelf near the window, and I stopped when I saw them, because several of them were of me. School photographs. The kind distributed annually and sent home in paper envelopes. Photographs I had no memory of anyone sending him. "A relative," he said quietly, seeing where I was looking. "She sent them when she could. Without your mother knowing. Someone had been feeding him evidence that I existed, the same way someone had recently fed me evidence that he existed." I sat down at the kitchen table. My phone buzzed. Melissa. I declined the call. It rang again 40 seconds later. I declined it again. Then a text arrived. "Mom is completely falling apart. Whatever you think you're doing, you need to stop. You don't know the full story, and you're hurting people who love you." I set the phone face down and looked at Daniel. "Tell me about the petitions," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, moved to the hallway, and returned carrying a cardboard box, the kind used for file storage, worn at the corners, the lid held down by a rubber band stretched thin with age. He set it on the table between us. Inside, journals. Composition notebooks, mostly. A decade's worth, stacked in chronological order. The earliest one had a date written on the cover in marker, the year I was born. "I started keeping records after the first petition was dismissed," he said. "My attorney told me documentation was the only thing that would matter if it ever went back to court." I opened the first journal. The handwriting inside was small and precise. Dates in the left margin. Notes alongside them. Called the Garfield Street number, disconnected. Sent certified letter, returned as undeliverable. New address obtained from public record. Letter sent. No response. Page after page of attempts, each one logged with the same disciplined neutrality, the way someone writes when they have trained themselves not to let feeling interfere with record-keeping. I recognized the instinct. I had spent my career doing the same thing. My phone buzzed again. I didn't look. Then a voicemail notification appeared. Not from Melissa. From a number I didn't recognize, an aunt I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. I played it on speaker quietly. "Hannah, this is Aunt Renee. I don't know what's gotten into you, but your mother called me this morning absolutely devastated. She gave up everything for you. Everything. And you're out there digging through old files and consorting with a man who walked out on your family. I think you owe her an apology." Consorting. That was the word Patricia had used. I could hear her in it, the precise, loaded vocabulary of someone drafting a narrative for distribution. She had called Renee, which meant she had called others. The entire family had received a version of this morning before I'd even arrived at Daniel's door. "She's been busy," I said, more to myself than to him. Daniel looked at the phone without surprise. "She was always fast," he said. By the time I filed the second petition, she had already contacted 3 members of my own family and told them I was unstable. 2 of them testified against me. I set the journal down. His own family. She had reached into his family and flipped them. I had thought the lie was contained, a story Patricia told me, a narrative she maintained inside our household. A private deception between a mother and a daughter. That wasn't what this was. This was a campaign. Organized, sustained, reaching outward in every direction to ensure that no matter where I looked, the story she had built would be waiting there ahead of me. I turned to the next page of the journal. Then the next. 36 years. Documented in composition notebooks stacked in a cardboard box on the kitchen table of a man who lived 47 miles from where I grew up. At some point during the 3rd journal, Daniel stood and refilled his coffee without being asked. When he sat back down, he didn't speak for a while. Neither did I. The lake was visible through the kitchen window, gray and flat in the November light, the dock extending out over still water. I had arrived angry. Sitting there, reading his handwriting, the careful, undefeated record of someone who kept trying long after trying had stopped making sense, I stopped being angry. Something quieter replaced it. Something that would take longer to name. I closed the journal and looked at him. He was watching the window. Then he turned back to me, and something in his expression shifted, a decision being made. He stood, crossed to the sideboard near the far wall, crouched and opened a lower cabinet. From inside, he retrieved a small metal lockbox, the kind with a single key. He set it on the table, unlocked it, but did not open the lid. He looked at me. "There is one thing I've never shown anyone," he said. "Not even my attorney." The law office of Whitmore and Carver occupied the 4th floor of a building downtown that had the particular stillness of places where serious decisions are made quietly. No music in the lobby. No ambient noise piped through speakers. The receptionist spoke in a register calibrated to convey discretion. The chairs in the waiting area were leather, dark, solid, the kind that don't creak when you shift your weight. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and recycled air conditioning. I had arrived with a folder, organized by category, court filings, postmarked envelopes, the photograph from the hallway drawer, a printed log of the journal entries Daniel had allowed me to photograph. The kind of documentation I build before any serious compliance review. Clean, chronological, defensible. The senior attorney, a composed woman named Margaret Ellison, mid-50s, reading glasses on a chain, reviewed the contents without expression. You said this connects to the Brooks Family Trust, she said. Daniel Brooks is my biological father. He's a named trustor. I believe I should have been listed as a beneficiary, and I believe that information was deliberately withheld during administration reviews. She looked at me over the folder. That's a significant allegation. I'm aware. She nodded once, stood, and excused herself. While she was gone, my phone buzzed. An email. From my mother. The subject line read, "Formal notice." I opened it. "Hannah, I have consulted with my attorney regarding your recent conduct. Contacting members of Daniel Brooks' legal and financial network while making unsubstantiated claims about our family constitutes harassment. If this continues, I will have no choice but to pursue appropriate legal remedies. I have always protected you. I am asking you, for the last time, to stop before you destroy something that cannot be repaired." I read it twice. She had contacted her attorney. The woman who had spent 36 years intercepting letters, contesting visitation petitions, and concealing a beneficiary from a trust administration, was now threatening to sue me for harassment. I saved the email, labeled it in my folder log, and put my phone away. Margaret Ellison returned with a second attorney, younger, carrying a laptop and a manila envelope. "We've been doing some preliminary review since Daniel contacted us last week," she said, settling back into her chair. "There are some things you should see." The first document she slid across the desk was a printed email chain. The chain began with an address I recognized as my mother's personal email. The recipient was Melissa. "He's hired someone new." A paralegal contacted the trust administrators asking about descendants. "We need to make sure they don't find anything that connects back to H. Call me tonight and do not put anything else in writing after this." I noted the date. 11 years ago. Melissa's reply was brief, understood. Already handled the administrator. She won't ask again. Already handled. My sister. Not a passive bystander absorbing our mother's version of events. An active participant in ensuring that I remained erased from a financial record I had a legitimate claim to. I had underestimated that. I had assumed Melissa was loyal out of habit, out of proximity, out of the kind of family inertia that keeps people from examining what they've agreed to participate in. But the email wasn't passive. It was operational. That was the first thing that stopped me cold. The second came 60 seconds later. Margaret Ellison opened the manila envelope and removed a set of photocopied trust administration records. She placed them in front of me and pointed to a section near the bottom of a page marked Beneficiary Review, Cycle 4. During this review, she said, the administrator was required to document all known descendants of the trustors. Daniel's parents, the original trust grantors, had 2 children, Daniel and his late sister Eleanor. I understand. Daniel has 1 biological child. She looked at me. You. But in this document, the descendant field for Daniel's line reads, "No confirmed living issue." That language was used in 3 consecutive review cycles. No confirmed living issue. I existed. Daniel knew I existed. His paralegal had apparently come close enough to the trust that someone, my mother, my sister, had intervened to prevent the connection from being made. For 3 consecutive review cycles, I had been administratively erased. What does that mean financially? I asked. It means the distributions made during those cycles were calculated without you. Funds that should have been held or allocated differently were dispersed to other parties. She paused. We're still calculating the full scope, but it isn't a small number. The relationship had been stolen first. The money, it turned out, had been taken alongside it, quietly, procedurally, through the kind of paperwork that only gets examined when someone thinks to look. I had thought the worst of it was the birthday cards in the storage unit. I was wrong. My phone buzzed again. Melissa this time. A text, not a call. Mom forwarded me your conversation with her attorney. I just want you to know, some people spend their whole lives chasing things that were never theirs to begin with. You should really think about what you're doing to this family before it's too late. She had borrowed the taunt, delivered it verbatim, which told me Patricia had coached her on exactly what to say. I set the phone face down on the attorney's conference table. Margaret Ellison had been watching my face. There's one more thing, she said. She exchanged a glance with the younger attorney beside her, brief, professional, but carrying something in it. He opened his laptop, turned it to face me. On the screen was a digital audio file interface, multiple recordings, each labeled with a date, each marked as recovered from an archived voicemail system connected to the Garfield Street landline. Dozens of them, spanning years. As the attorneys reviewed the trust records, one of them suddenly asked, "Does your mother know we found the voicemails?" Eleanor Brooks was buried on a gray Thursday morning in November. I had never met her, but she was Daniel's older sister, the woman who had quietly sent him school photographs of me for years, feeding him evidence of a daughter he was not allowed to reach. She had kept her own kind of record, her own quiet resistance. The reception following the service was held in a hall attached to the church. Long rectangular room, folding tables covered in white paper cloths, catered trays along one wall untouched. The smell of coffee, cut flowers, and the particular flatness of a room full of people managing grief in public. I arrived an hour before Patricia. That was intentional. Daniel was already there, seated near the front of the room with Eleanor's adult children. Trust attorneys Margaret Ellison and her associate had come at my request, a quiet addition to the guest list, explained to no one. 2 executors of Eleanor's estate were present by obligation. Extended family filled the remaining chairs, most of them connected to both the Brooks and Mercer sides of a history I was only now fully reading. I had brought a document folder. Inside, printed copies, organized in sets. 1 set per table. I had not distributed them yet. I stood near the side wall with my coffee and I waited. Patricia arrived at 11:12. She entered the way she always entered rooms she believed belonged to her, composed, unhurried, already scanning for the people whose attention she intended to claim first. She was dressed in appropriate black, hair neat, expression arranged into the particular combination of grief and dignity she deployed at occasions requiring public sympathy. She saw me. Her expression recalibrated, barely, quickly, and she crossed toward the center of the room rather than toward me. Melissa was with her. I watched Patricia work the room, accepting condolences, touching people's arms, performing the role of a woman who had simply come to pay her respects. She was good at it. She had been doing it her entire life. Then she saw Daniel, and the performance tightened, a subtle, full-body adjustment, like a structure bracing for weather. She turned away from him and said, to no one in particular, but loudly enough to carry, "I hope everyone here understands what this family has been put through recently. Strangers inserting themselves into a grieving family's private affairs, dragging old grievances into a day that should be about Eleanor." A few people nodded. Most looked uncertain. Then she looked directly at me across the room and said clearly, "If he loved her, he would have found her." That's all I've ever said. And I stand by it. The room went quiet. This was the moment she had calculated, the last public deployment of the only argument she had ever needed. Said at a funeral, in front of witnesses, with grief as cover. Said to remind everyone that her version of the story had been consistent for 36 years. She stood very still, waiting for the room to absorb it. He did find her, I said. I set down my coffee. I picked up the document folders from the table beside me and began moving through the room, placing one at each table. Quietly, without rushing, Patricia watched. Her stillness shifted into something else. I reached the small wireless speaker I had positioned near the room's front corner before arriving. Connected to my phone, I pressed play. A voice filled the room. Old audio, compressed with years, slightly degraded, but entirely clear. This is a message for Hannah. Please tell Hannah I called. My number hasn't changed. I just want to hear her voice. The room didn't move. A second recording followed. Please tell my daughter I love her. Whatever she's been told, please tell her that part isn't true. Then a third. Please. I'm asking you. Please let me speak to her. Just once. She doesn't have to call back. I just want her to know I'm here. 12 recordings in total. Different years. Same voice. Same request. Never answered. I watched the room absorb it, the attorneys, the executors, the extended family, Eleanor's children who had grown up understanding pieces of this story that I had never been allowed to know. I watched faces change as the recordings moved through the air. Discomfort becoming recognition. Recognition becoming something harder. Melissa stood up. This is manipulative, she said. This is a performance. Margaret Ellison opened her own folder. The certified mail logs confirm 41 documented delivery attempts over a 30-year period, she said, without raising her voice. The trust administration records confirm Hannah's existence was omitted from 3 consecutive beneficiary reviews. We have the emails coordinating that omission. Melissa sat back down. Patricia had not moved. I walked to where Daniel was sitting. He held out the envelope without being asked. He had been carrying it since we arrived. The 7th birthday card. Still in its original envelope, worn soft at the edges, my name on the front in handwriting I had spent my whole life not knowing. I opened it. The room watched. Inside, in ink slightly faded from nearly 30 years of storage in a Ziploc bag inside a cardboard box in a storage unit on Route 9. No matter what you're told, I think about you every day. Love, Dad. He had written it when I was 7. I had waited all day for it that birthday. Nothing had arrived. I held the card for a moment. Then I set it carefully on the table in front of me. Not as evidence, not as an exhibit, but because my hands needed to be still. Around the room, people were opening the document folders. I watched Patricia's face as the room read. She had operated for 36 years in an environment where she controlled what people were allowed to know. The narrative had been sustainable because it was distributed selectively, maintained carefully, and never tested against documentation. It was being tested now, and it was not surviving. She looked at the attorneys, then at Melissa, who had gone very quiet, then at the extended family members who were no longer looking at her the way they had when she walked in. For the first time since the restaurant, since before the restaurant, I suspected Patricia had no audience that believed her. She crossed the room toward me, slowly. With the deliberate composure of someone holding themselves together by deciding that composure is the last form of control available. She stopped very close. Her voice dropped to something almost private, just below the room's ambient murmur. You're choosing him over your family, she whispered. I looked at her. I thought about the storage unit, the 28 unopened cards, the court filings, the voicemails, the trust records. The photograph with custody hearing written on the back in pencil. 36 years assembled into a folder I had distributed across folding tables at a funeral reception hall while her own voice from archived emails played in the attorney's memories. And Hannah's response would end the story forever. 3 months passed. I want to be precise about that because the way people describe aftermath always makes it sound faster than it is. Cleaner. As though exposure produces resolution on a schedule. As though the moment a lie collapses publicly, the people who believed it simply recalibrate and move forward. That is not how it works. What actually happened in the weeks following Eleanor's memorial happened slowly, in increments, through attorneys and administrators and phone calls I was not party to. The trust review was reopened formally. The distribution calculations were revised. Patricia's access to certain funds was suspended pending the outcome of a civil proceeding that was still, at the time of this recording, ongoing. Melissa stopped calling after the 3rd week. I did not reach out to her. Several extended family members who had received Patricia's version of events, Aunt Renee among them, contacted me directly, in writing, with various degrees of apology and explanation. I read each message once. I did not respond to most of them. I was not angry. I was finished. The voicemail from Patricia arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, 6 weeks after the memorial. I saw her name on the notification and did not listen immediately. I made coffee first. Stood at my kitchen window for a while. Then I opened it. Her voice was controlled, that particular controlled quality she reserves for moments when she has decided that composure will be interpreted as innocence. Hannah, I have given you space, which is more than you've given me. I want you to understand something. Everything I did, every decision I made, was to protect you from a man who had already shown me exactly who he was. You were a child. I was alone. Nobody helped me. Nobody asked how I was managing. I gave up years of my life for you, and now you've handed them to a stranger because some attorney showed you old paperwork and you decided that was the truth. I sacrificed. I deleted it. Not at the end. Midway through the word sacrificed. I set my phone on the counter. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked once in the distance. The refrigerator hummed. I noticed, for the first time in as long as I could remember, that the silence after her voice did not feel like absence. It felt like room. Daniel's porch faces the lake on the western side of the property, which means that in the late afternoon, the light comes in low and flat across the water and turns everything it touches a particular shade of pale gold. The dock extends out maybe 30 feet. In winter, the lake is still and dark and enormous. In early spring, which is when I am sitting here as I tell you this, it is beginning to show color again, gray softening toward blue at the edges, where the far bank catches the early warmth. There are 2 chairs on the porch, old wooden ones with faded cushions that have clearly been there for years. The kind of chairs that have held a great deal of quiet. I arrived in the early afternoon. Daniel made tea, which he does without asking because it is simply what he does when someone comes to the house. We sat outside because the temperature had finally lifted enough to make it possible. We talked for a long time about things that had nothing to do with Patricia or attorneys or trust records. He told me about Eleanor, the real Eleanor, not the version I had encountered through legal documents. He described her as precise, funny, quietly stubborn. The kind of person who expressed love through practical action rather than declaration. She's the one who started sending the photographs, I said. She started the year you turned 9, he said. She never told me how she managed it. I never asked. I thought about that. A woman I had never met, feeding a father evidence of a daughter across a distance that had been deliberately manufactured. Some resistance is loud. Some of it is a school photograph slipped into an envelope once a year for 27 years. He went inside briefly and returned carrying the envelope. He held it out. I recognized it immediately. I would recognize it anywhere now. The soft, worn corners. The slight yellowing of the paper. My name on the front in that careful handwriting, each letter formed like it mattered. I want you to have it, he said. Not as evidence. Just yours. I took it. I had held it before, in the storage unit, in the flat fluorescent light with concrete dust in the air and my mother's voicemail still running through my head. I had held it and set it back down because the moment hadn't been right for it. This moment was different. I opened the envelope. The card inside was simple, the kind a person chooses when they want the words to carry the weight, not the design. A single image on the front. Plain lettering. Inside, in ink that had faded to a warm brown over nearly 30 years. No matter what you're told, I think about you every day. Love, Dad. I read it once. Then I read it again, slowly, not searching for subtext, not analyzing it, not filing it mentally as documentation. Just reading it the way a 7-year-old would have read it if it had ever arrived. He had written it when I was small enough that he still signed it Dad, not Daniel, not his full name, not a formal closing designed to hold up in a legal proceeding. Just Dad. Like he assumed I would know exactly who that was. I sat with the card for a while. Beside me, Daniel was quiet. He had spent 36 years being quiet in all the ways that mattered, documenting, waiting, filing petitions, sending letters into silence, keeping journals no one was supposed to see. He had been patient in the way that people are patient when patience is the only remaining option. The lake moved slightly in the afternoon wind. The dock shifted against its mooring with a soft, rhythmic sound. I set the card on my knee, not face down, not inside a folder, not sealed in a Ziploc bag in a cardboard box. Just there, in the open, in the light. Patricia was still constructing her version of events somewhere across town. I understood that and had stopped needing it to be otherwise. She would tell the story she needed to tell. She would find the people willing to receive it. That had always been true and would remain true, and it no longer required anything from me. The card on my knee was not a verdict. It was not a weapon. It was a father writing to a daughter he had not been allowed to reach, saying the one thing he needed her to know. And she finally knew it. The years Patricia stole could never be returned, but for the first time since she was 7 years old, Hannah stopped wondering whether her father loved her. If you've made it this far, thank you. Not just for watching, but for staying with Hannah through every part of this. Stories like this one don't feel like fiction to a lot of people. They feel like something they already know. A name changed, a detail different, but the wound is familiar. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below telling me which moment hit hardest. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the channel where these stories live. New ones come regularly, and each one is built the same way. No shortcuts, no filler. Just the full story told the way it deserves to be told. We'll meet again in the next video. Take care of yourself.